The clink of silverware and the gentle hum of conversation filled the private dining room at La Belle Vigna, a vineyard-turned-restaurant nestled just outside of town. Golden light from the chandeliers caught in the crystal glasses as the servers moved like dancers around the tables. My mother looked radiant in a sea-blue gown, her hair swept up in a chignon she'd perfected over decades of formal events. My father, ever the stately figure in his tailored navy suit, held her hand as they greeted guests one by one, each smile rehearsed but convincing. It was their 50th wedding anniversary. A milestone. A celebration of endurance, love, and as they liked to joke, selective hearing. Friends and family had flown in from out of state. A slideshow of their black and white wedding photos played on a screen near the piano. There was laughter. Nostalgia. Toasts waiting to be given. I sat beside my husband, Daniel, who was unusually quiet. He sipped his water, not wine though we were at a vineyard, and barely touched his food. I had chalked it up to stress. He had pulled an overnight shift 2 days ago and hadn't properly recovered. But there was something else in his posture. A tightness. His shoulders stiff. His eyes scanning the room with a precision that didn't feel like a passive observer anymore. It felt clinical. "You okay?" I whispered, leaning toward him. He nodded, but it wasn't a real nod. Just emotion. "It's just, you'll see." "See what?" But before he could answer, the music softened and my father stood, glass raised. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice strong, commanding the room like he had in every classroom he taught in for 35 years. 50 years with this beautiful woman, he looked at my mother with a smile that melted everyone, has been the greatest adventure of my life. Applause. More words followed, about love, family, perseverance. And then the part one had been dreading. He turned to me. "And of course, none of this would have been possible without our Sarah, our miracle child after Emily." A flicker of something cold passed through me. The way he always said it, after Emily. Not with Emily. Not because of Emily. Just, after. Emily had died when I was 8. 17 years old, beautiful, rebellious, and gone in what they said was an accident. A car. Jen. A mistake. I barely remembered her, except in pieces. The scent of her shampoo. The scratch of her eyeliner pencil against the bathroom mirror. The time she curled up beside me during a thunderstorm, whispering that no one ever truly dies, they just become quieter. When the MC passed the mic around the table, inviting others to share stories and give toasts, I smiled. Shared a short, sweet memory. My older brother spoke. My aunt. Then it was Daniel's turn. He stood slowly, but instead of lifting his glass, he set it down. His expression unreadable. "I won't be giving a toast," he said quietly. A hush fell over the room. One of those silences that rings in the ears. "I'm sorry," he continued, his voice calm, but cold. "There are things that should be addressed before we celebrate. Things that matter more than appearances." I felt the blood drain from my face. My mother's hand froze mid-air, still holding her champagne. My father narrowed his eyes. "What are you doing?" I whispered. He didn't answer. Just sat back down, the room recovering awkwardly as the MC attempted to laugh it off and pass the mic to the next guest. But I wasn't laughing. As the dinner continued, Daniel didn't eat. He didn't smile. When I touched his hand, he flinched, then softened. "You should know what they did," he said softly, eyes on the tablecloth. "What are you talking about?" He looked at me then, fully. "Emily." I blinked. "What about her?" "They didn't tell you the truth." I laughed nervously. "Daniel, this isn't the time." "I know. But there never was a good time. So now is what we have." I leaned in closer. "What are you saying?" He lowered his voice to a whisper. "She didn't die in an accident, Sarah. She didn't die that year at all. She didn't die that year at all." The words hit me like ice water down my spine. I stared at Daniel, waiting for the punchline, for the smirk, for the clarification that never came. Around us, dessert had begun to circulate. Espresso crème brûlée, chocolate ganache tarts, tiny saucers of poached pears with cinnamon and clove, but all of it might as well have been dust. I barely registered the clink of plates or the polite laughter from the next table. My world had shrunk to the man beside me, and the sentence he had just said. "What are you talking about?" I said again, quieter now, as if the room might hear the question and turn on me. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his napkin, folded neatly on his lap. His thumb traced its edge as if gathering strength from the threadwork. Then, without looking up, he said, "I think your parents lied to you. About how she died. About when she died. About everything." I wanted to laugh. Wanted to grab him and pull him outside, scold him for being cruel in a moment meant for celebration. But I couldn't. Because somewhere deep inside me, in a place I hadn't touched in decades, something started to crack. Not from disbelief, but from recognition. Because as much as I wanted to deny it, there had always been something about Emily's death that never quite made sense. I remembered being pulled out of school early that rainy day. I remembered my father's face, not grieving but grim. I remembered my mother's silence, the way she held my hand so tight in the funeral home I couldn't feel my fingers. And I remembered, vividly, being told I would not be attending the burial. That it was too much for a girl my age. I never saw her body. Never saw a casket. Only a photograph, framed in white roses, and the sound of my parents' voices, sharp and hushed, behind the bedroom door at night. "You need to explain," I whispered, aware of the way my voice was beginning to shake. "You can't just drop something like this." Daniel finally looked at me. There was no triumph in his expression, no righteousness. Only exhaustion, like a man who had been holding a truth too heavy for too long. "About a year ago, a woman came into the hospital where I work. She was a counselor from a private recovery center, needing clearance for one of her clients. We got to talking, routine stuff. But when I asked who she worked with, she gave me a name. Emily. Emily Carson." I blinked. "That's not uncommon." He nodded. "I know." But when I asked how old she was, she said 43. And something in the way she hesitated, the way she said the last name like she didn't fully believe it belonged, it made me curious. So later that week, I looked into the center's records. Nothing direct, nothing illegal. Just enough to learn that years ago, a girl matching Emily's age and description had been checked in under a different last name. 17. Pregnant. Suicidal. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. "She died 3 years later," Daniel continued, his voice barely above a whisper now. "Not in a car accident. She died in that center. Alone. After being abandoned by the people who sent her there." I stood up from the table without realizing it. My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Daniel followed quickly, grabbing his jacket. We didn't say goodbye to anyone. I barely remember leaving, only the sound of my heels on the stone path outside, my breath fogging in the crisp autumn night, my hands shaking as I reached the car. "Why now?" I asked once we were inside, doors shut against the cold. "Why today?" "Because I couldn't pretend anymore," he said simply. "I've seen the damage silence does. I've seen what it looks like when people choose comfort over truth. And I knew you deserved to know." I wanted to argue, to say he had no right. But even then, in that fragile, unraveling moment, I knew. I knew. There had been signs. Questions I never asked. Gaps I never filled. My parents never spoke of Emily. Her name, when uttered, landed in the air like a moth hitting glass. Growing up, I was always the only child. Her room was turned into a guest room. Her pictures disappeared, save for one on the hallway wall, carefully curated, framed behind glass, untouchable. And yet I had never questioned it. Because to question would be to disturb the beautiful fiction they had wrapped around me like silk, the perfect family, the loving parents, the tragedy we endured together. But maybe it wasn't a tragedy. Maybe it was a decision. Daniel reached into the glove box and handed me a folder. "I've been compiling this for months," he said. "I wasn't sure when to show you. But I think you're ready." Inside were printouts. Records. Scanned notes. A faded ID photo of a girl who looked just like Emily. Only older, thinner, her eyes sunken but unmistakable. I clutched the folder to my chest like it might burn through me. And maybe it already had. I didn't cry that night. Not yet. There was a numbness I couldn't explain, a vacuum forming where belief used to be. I lay in bed beside Daniel, wide awake, the documents spread across the duvet, my mind spiraling through every memory I had of my parents, now tainted with suspicion. What had they done? And why? Why bury her in a lie when they could have brought her home? What were they so afraid of? By morning, I knew I had to ask them. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want to give them time to prepare, to craft one of their perfect explanations, their well-practiced family performances. The morning after the anniversary dinner, I drove straight to the house I'd grown up in. The white colonial with navy shutters and a red door that had always been a symbol of warmth and welcome. But that morning, it looked different. Smaller, somehow. Less inviting. Like a stage after the play is over, props still in place but stripped of meaning. My mother answered the door. She was still in her silk robe, a mug of tea in hand, her hair pinned up in soft rollers. She blinked at me, surprised but not alarmed. "Sarah? Did you leave something at the restaurant?" "No," I said, brushing past her. "We need to talk." She followed me into the kitchen, the familiar scent of her jasmine hand cream trailing behind. My father was at the breakfast table, reading the paper, still wearing his reading glasses. When he looked up and saw me, a brief smile crossed his face, the same one he used on students and neighbors and checkout clerks. That smile faltered when he saw the expression on mine. "What's going on?" he asked, folding the paper. I didn't sit. I placed the folder Daniel had given me on the kitchen island and opened it slowly, letting the photo slide into view first. "This," I said, "is Emily. Taken at a recovery center in New York. 3 years after you told me she died." The silence that followed was immediate and absolute, a vacuum sucking the air out of the room. My mother didn't speak. My father stared at the photo for a long moment before pushing his chair back and standing. "Where did you get that?" he asked, not angrily, but carefully, as if handling a grenade. "Daniel found it." He started asking questions. He found a paper trail.
My Mutter sat down Withhut avert.
Her hands trembled slightly as she set her mug down. The sound of ceramic touching granite felt louder than it should have.
You lead to me, Isaid. Altese ears.
You let me believe my sister was dead when she was still alive. My father rubbed a hand across his face. He looked old suddenly, as if the truth had aged him in a single moment. "We didn't lie," he said at last. "We protected you." "From what?" "From her." "She wasn't well," my mother whispered. Her voice was brittle. "She was lost. Unstable. We tried to help her. We did everything we could." "You sent her away." "She was 17 and pregnant," my father said. "Refusing to say who the father was. Refusing to eat. Refusing therapy. We had to make a decision." "And you decided to erase her?" "We decided to save you," my mother snapped.
You wäre it.
"Do you know what it would have done to you, to grow up with that chaos in the house?" I felt like I was going to be sick.
I brist musef on the counter, bile riesing in my throat.
"So you institutionalized your daughter," I said. "Then told your other daughter she was dead. How is that not erasure?" "She asked us not to contact you," my father said. "That was part of the arrangement with the center. She didn't want to see us. She blamed us for everything."
And did you ever tear Y?
"Did you visit? Write? Anything?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. I couldn't. I was ashamed. There it was.
The real raison. Not concern. Not protection.
Shame. "She died alone," I said. 3 years later. "And you never told me." "We weren't there," my father said, quietly now. "We didn't know until months after it happened. We got a letter. From a staff member who remembered us. By then." He trailed off, and I waited for the rest, but nothing came. "I want to see her grave," I said. "There isn't one," my mother replied. "She was cremated. The facility handled it. We were told her remains were unclaimed." "Unclaimed." My voice cracked. "She was your daughter." My father put a hand on my mother's shoulder, but she shrugged it off. Her composure had cracked. She stared out the window as if expecting Emily to come walking up the driveway, still 17, still angry, still alive. You told everyone she died in a car accident, I said. You had a funeral. You had a photo. You made me write a eulogy in crayons. My father flinched. We did what we thought was best. No, I said, backing toward the door. You did what was easiest. My mother rose then, coming toward me, arms out as if to console me, to pull me into some hollow embrace. But I stepped back. I need time, I said.
I need space. Sarah, please. No.
I turned and left. The air outside was colder than I remembered.
Sharp. Real.
It filled my lungs and steadied me in a way my parents never could again. I drove without direction, letting the roads unfold ahead of me like a map I didn't know how to read. I ended up at the cemetery. Not because Emily was buried there, she wasn't, but because it was where I had always believed she was. I walked past the stone I had laid flowers at for years, a gravestone with her name and dates that were now a lie. I stood in front of it, staring at the moss growing along its edge, and I whispered, I'm sorry. Because in a way, I had betrayed her too. I had stopped asking. I had believed what they told me because it was easier than confronting the possibility that they were capable of something worse. I sat on the cold bench nearby, clutching the folder in my lap, and I wept, not just for Emily, but for the years stolen, for the truth buried, for the family I thought I had. I stayed at the cemetery until the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows over the gravestones like a curtain drawing shut. I didn't know where else to go. Home felt too raw, too loud with memory. My parents' house was out of the question. And Daniel, sweet Daniel, had left a dozen texts I hadn't answered. I knew he'd understand. This wasn't something I could explain in bullet points or emojis. This was something that needed silence. That night, back in our living room, I finally spoke. I need to find someone who knew her, I said. Daniel looked up from the couch, where he'd been waiting in the soft amber light, a half-read book resting on his chest. He didn't ask who. He didn't ask why. Just nodded once and said, I'll help. It took a week to track down the woman Daniel had first spoken to, the counselor from the recovery center in New York. Her name was Monica. She had transferred to a different nonprofit but agreed to meet with us when she learned what it was about. We drove 6 hours north on a rainy Saturday, the highway slick with mist, my stomach twisted into a quiet knot. I didn't know what I wanted. Confirmation?
Forgiveness?
A last connection to a sister I barely remembered but could suddenly not stop grieving. The building was small and unimpressive, just a few blocks from a low-income housing complex. Monica met us in the lobby, her hair pulled back, no makeup, eyes that had seen too many truths. She offered us tea, which we declined, then ushered us into her office. I remember her, she said before I could even ask. Emily. But she didn't go by that name here. What did she use? I asked, already knowing the answer would hurt. Claire M., she said. She never explained what it stood for. We assumed it was a safety thing. Some girls came to us fleeing bad homes, abusive families, or just situations too complicated for simple labels. Was she okay? I asked. The question felt childish, ridiculous. She had died there. How could she have been okay? Monica's face softened. She was brilliant. Angry. Funny, sometimes. She loved to read, devoured every book we had in the little library. She wrote letters, constantly, but never mailed them. Said the words weren't ready. Said the person she wanted to read them wouldn't understand yet. Do you still have any? I asked, my voice trembling. Monica paused. We're not supposed to keep patient writings. But some of the staff. We break rules for the ones we can't forget.
Give ML a moment.
She left us in the quiet of her office, Daniel's hand resting on mine like an anchor. A few minutes later, Monica returned with a small bundle of papers, tied with faded green ribbon. I untied it slowly, reverently. The first page was dated 8 months before Emily Claire died. It was written in blue ink, in handwriting I remembered from birthday cards and scrawled notes on bathroom mirrors.
Dear S. You wäre the last time I saw you.
Your hair was in pigtails and you wouldn't stop asking if you could borrow my nail polish. I told you no. I told you to grow up. That was the last thing I said to you. That's what I remember when I try to sleep. That I didn't hug you. That I didn't say I loved you. I wish I had. I wish I had told you everything. But I didn't want you to be dragged down with me. You deserved something clean. And now I live in a place that smells like antiseptic and burnt coffee and I pretend I chose this. But it was chosen for me.
Like everything else.
But I still write. Because words are the only things they can't take away.
I write for you, little sister.
So you'll know I tried. I tried so hard to come back. But I don't think they'll let me. Love E. I couldn't breathe. There were 5 more letters. Some were more lucid than others. One rambled for 3 pages about a dream where she was swimming in an ocean made of lavender. Another ended mid-sentence, as if she'd been interrupted and never returned. The last was dated only a week before her death. It said simply, if someone reads this and remembers me, not the version they erased, but the girl who stayed angry because she still believed she mattered, then maybe I didn't disappear after all. I left Monica's office with the bundle clutched to my chest, my throat raw. I didn't speak the entire ride home. That night, I placed the letters in a fireproof box in our closet, alongside my own journals, my wedding vows, and the first ultrasound of the child Daniel and I lost 2 years ago.
Grief is strange like that.
It layers, overlaps, echoes. I had buried my own sorrow so deeply that I didn't know it could still respond to someone else's pain. The next morning, I called the newspaper. Not to publish a story. Not yet. But to ask about obituaries.
About public records.
About what it would take to have a name corrected, a record amended. I didn't want Emily to be a hidden line on a private ledger. I wanted her to exist again.
In the world.
In history. Later that week, Daniel and I drove back to New York, to the field behind the center where, Monica told us, unclaimed remains were scattered in accordance with state law. There was no plaque. No marker. Just grass. And silence. The article ran a week later, not front-page news, but a quietly devastating column buried halfway through the Sunday edition, titled, A Sister Lost Twice, One Woman's Search for the Truth. I didn't write it, but the reporter included everything I gave her, the letters, the false death certificate, the quote from the counselor who remembered Emily's laughter echoing in the library. They even printed a scanned photograph Monica had saved, Emily sitting cross-legged in the grass behind the center, a notebook in her lap, her hair windblown and free. It was the first time I had seen her older than 17. The fallout was slow, then sudden.
At first, silence.
Then a phone call from my parents' lawyer. Then a voicemail from my mother. Clipped, brittle, controlled as always. Sarah, I don't know what you think this will solve. You've embarrassed the family. You've destroyed your father. If you had questions, you should have come to us privately. This was not your story to tell. But it was. God, it was. It had always been my story too, because they had buried part of me along with Emily. Because the lie they wrapped around her death had stretched its shadow across every year of my life since. I hadn't just lost a sister, I'd been raised in the absence of truth, in the quiet beneath a portrait that never aged. And now that truth was loose. Some friends reached out with shock, sympathy, and guilt, mostly guilt. Old neighbors apologized for never asking questions. A teacher from my childhood sent an email saying she had suspected something was wrong back then but never wanted to overstep. The pastor who had officiated the fake funeral stopped me in the grocery store with trembling hands and a hollow expression. She told me to trust her, he said.
Your Mutter.
She said Emily was already gone by the time I arrived. She was, I said. Just not in the way she told you. And then, of course, came the internet. Comments on the digital version of the article were, predictably, a storm of conflicting emotions. Some called my parents monsters. Others called me a traitor. A few accused me of exploiting trauma for attention. But the messages that stayed with me were the quiet ones. The direct messages from strangers who had lost siblings to silence, to institutions, to shame. People who had been erased by their own families for being inconvenient, difficult, or simply not who they were expected to be.
Thank you for saying her name.
My sister disappeared too.
Ineva kne ho tu grieve her.
This helped me believe I'm not crazy for remembering someone everyone else wanted to forget. Daniel read them aloud to me at night when I couldn't sleep. He never once said I told you so. He just held me.
Letse silense breate between us.
Let the grief take its shape. One evening, about 2 weeks after the article ran, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find my father standing there, alone, no coat despite the late November chill, his hands shoved deep into his pants pockets. I need to talk to you, he said. We sat on the porch. He didn't ask to come inside. He looked older. Not just tired, older. Smaller. Like the weight of the truth had finally started pressing down on his spine. I didn't want to send her away, he said. It was your mother. She thought the center would fix her.
Make it disappear.
We argued for weeks. But in the end, I agreed. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what? I asked. He looked down at his hands.
Of the shame. Of the whispers.
Of raising 2 daughters in a house filled with grief and resentment. I thought, if we could start over with you, we could get it right this time. I swallowed the bitter taste rising in my throat. You didn't start over. You erased her. I know. He paused. You think I didn't suffer? I think about her every day. Her laugh. The way she slammed doors when she was angry.
The vesche use tu sing visse radio ofki just tu annoy me.
She wrote letters, I said. To me. She never sent them, but she never forgot me. You can say you mourned her, but she was alone.
And you kne ite.
He nodded slowly.
You're right.
The wind picked up, carrying the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke. He stared out at the streetlights flickering on, one by one. Your mother won't talk to me, he said. She blames me for not stopping you.
For letting the story come out.
I didn't do this to hurt her, I said.
I did it to remember Emily.
She thinks you've destroyed the family name. Maybe the name deserved to be destroyed. He didn't argue. Just sat with that truth, quietly. When he finally stood to leave, he reached into his jacket and handed me a photo. It was the last one they ever took of Emily, before the center, before the silence. She was standing in the backyard, holding a paintbrush, her jeans stained, her hair wild in the wind. She was smiling, but there was something behind it. Something unsaid. She wasn't easy to love, he said. But she loved you. I know. He nodded, turned, and walked down the steps into the dark. That night, I framed the photo and placed it beside our front door, where keys and spare change gathered.
A place of ritual. A place of return.
Because Emily would never walk through my door again. But her story had. The winter that followed was quiet. Not empty, but still. The kind of quiet that settles after a long howling storm. I stopped waiting for apologies from my mother. She sent none. Her silence arrived like clockwork. Birthday unacknowledged, Christmas card unopened, a gift returned to sender with no note inside. It hurt, in the beginning. But after a while, I realized that I didn't need her permission to grieve. Or to speak. Or to remember. The anniversary of Emily's death, her real death, came in March. I marked it with a letter, not unlike the ones she used to write. I didn't burn it. I didn't bury it. I read it aloud, sitting cross-legged in our backyard beneath a sky streaked with gray. Daniel stood at the window, watching but not intruding. He knew this wasn't about him. Or even us. It was about the tether I was tying, finally, to the sister I had lost, the truth I had reclaimed. In April, I got a call from Monica. She told me the recovery center had decided to name their new library wing after Emily. They'd found more of her journals, unmailed letters, bits of poetry, short stories written in the margins of therapy worksheets. Some were lucid. Others were raw, unfinished, trailing off mid-thought. But they all carried her voice, sharp, defiant, searching. She had more to say, Monica told me. And now she finally can. I drove up the following weekend. Alone, this time. Daniel offered to come, but I said no. I needed to see it for myself. When I arrived, the new plaque was already installed. The Emily Carson Wing, in honor of a voice that refused to disappear. It was the first time I cried without guilt. Without shame. Just sorrow. And love. They let me sit there as long as I wanted, surrounded by donated books and shelves that smelled like cedar. I found one of her stories in a folder on the reference table. It was only 2 paragraphs, but it pulsed with her rhythm. Once there was a girl who screamed so loud the whole world heard her, but when they turned to look, they saw someone else entirely. So she kept screaming, even when her voice gave out, even when her body gave up, because somewhere deep inside, she knew someone would remember the sound of her name. I whispered it again. Emily. When I returned home, Daniel met me at the door with takeout and a quiet kiss. He never asked for details. Just wrapped me in the smell of curry and clean cotton and let me breathe. Spring came slowly that year, peeling winter off the trees one petal at a time. I started writing again, nothing public, not yet, but personal essays, fragments of memories I had once sealed off like an attic no one visited. I wrote about Emily's hair. About the way she danced when she thought no one was watching. About the crack in her bedroom window where she used to press her thumb and say, "This is where I keep the sky." Sometimes I wondered what she'd think of me now. If she'd laugh at how carefully I folded laundry. If she'd tease me for falling in love with a man who alphabetized his spices. If she'd forgive me for believing the lie. For being too young to fight for her when she was sent away. For living a life in the house that forgot her. But then I'd read her words again, and I knew. She never blamed me. She never stopped loving me. She just ran out of time. In July, I got an email from a young woman named Lila. She said she had been in the same recovery center as Emily, though years later. She had read the article. She recognized Emily's story, different in detail, identical in shape. They never let me keep my journal, she wrote. They said writing was unproductive. But reading Emily's words helped me remember who I used to be. Thank you for giving her back to us. I wrote her back. Told her she mattered. That she wasn't alone. Because that was the legacy Emily left. Not scandal. Not shame. But voice. Daniel and I never moved from our little house, though we did renovate the extra bedroom. It was never a nursery. Not in the end. But we turned it into a writing room, mine. One wall is filled with framed letters from Emily, typed up from the originals to preserve the ink. Another wall holds a single shelf, filled with books she loved. The window looks out on the same yard where I buried her first letter to me. I open it most mornings, let the air in, and speak her name. Not because I'm still grieving, but because I refuse to forget. People often say truth sets you free. What they don't say is that it also leaves you raw, emptied, remade. The kind of freedom that comes after truth isn't easy. It doesn't come with applause. It comes with quiet. With space. With the ache of rebuilding what was never real in the first place. But it's worth it. Because in the quiet, you start to hear things again. Like the sound of your own voice. Like the echo of someone you lost, but never really left. Like the rhythm of your sister's laughter, written between the lines of a story she never got to finish.